Well, an epic battle shaping up now in the race for the White House with less than 200 days to go. Brand new polling data showing a very tight race shaping up between President Obama and Mitt Romney. The latest numbers from the Wall Street Journal and NBC News show the president with a 6-point edge over Romney. With 7 months remaining before voters cast their ballots, what do these polls portend, if anything? Shira Toeplitz is a staff writer with Roll Call, joining us live. Shira, good to see you. Our own poll this week had the president with a narrow 2-point lead. But both of these polls are within the statistical margin of error. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that's important that you pointed out it's in the statistical margin of error, which basically means it can go either way. It's basically a toss-up. But I wouldn't pay attention too much to polls at this point in the race, because this is really the low bar for Romney. He's just went through this extended, long, bruising primary. He has a whole summer to recover now before the convention and then all fall. So this really should be Romney's low point. I think still a very competitive race.
President Obama has a 6-point lead in the state of Ohio, which is, as you know, a very key battleground state. But if you dig a little bit deeper, let's put this up on the screen. Here's what you find. 71% of Obama voters say they're voting for him. By contrast, 63% of Romney voters say they're voting against Obama, with just 29% saying they're voting for Romney. What does that tell you, Shira?
That tells me that Romney has some work to do still in the state of Ohio, introducing himself to voters. He obviously ran in a primary there in early March. Now he's going to have to do some work, probably with a lot of independent voters coming up. Ohio is a really competitive state and is a very sought-after prize in the Electoral College. There are 18 electoral votes up for grabs in that state out of the 270 needed to win, and I think you'll see both candidates fight a lot. It'll be interesting to see how differently Romney campaigns in the Buckeye State this time around versus the primary. I think he'll go to very different places than he went in March.
Nobody's really gained the White House in modern history without Ohio. But look, here's what's curious about Ohio. And let's put this up on the screen. Almost 70% of Ohio voters are dissatisfied with how things are going in the country today. And you know, quite often the president gets the blame. And yet, Mr. Obama's disapproval rating is nowhere near that. His disapproval is at 47%. So what do you make of that?
I think the White House has done a lot of groundwork in Ohio, even starting late last year. I was in Ohio in February covering a couple congressional races on the ground there, and you could see the Obama campaign's presence already there. They've laid this groundwork. They've had Michelle Obama do conference calls with voters in the area. They opened their 17th campaign office this week in the state of Ohio. They've worked hard to make sure the president is maintaining his image in this highly competitive battleground state.
Yeah, that is so amazing, the groundwork.
Yeah.
He was so good at that 4 years ago. Want to talk now about Florida. It's sort of the mother of all swing states, if you will. The president has a narrow lead there over Mitt Romney and again statistical tie. But take a look at this. If Senator Marco Rubio, the favorite son who gets a lot of chatter as the VP pick, if he is added to the race, it makes no difference among Florida voters. Are you surprised by that?
Not completely. There's always a lot of talk about the VP nominee about this time, every presidential cycle, and, oh, they could help this candidate carry their home state, or, oh, they'll help here. I think it's just that talk. Usually the vice presidential nominee doesn't really help necessarily in specific states. It just adds something to the larger ticket as a whole. Let's remember that Marco Rubio is also, on the whole, pretty untested as a national candidate. Granted, he ran in that competitive Florida Senate race, but he is not the most seasoned choice as a vice presidential nominee. And I think the last thing Republicans would ever want to do this cycle is have another Sarah Palin untested candidate situation.
Right. He may have a downside to him, whereas Rob Portman, Ohio, does not really. Well, during the nasty Republican primary there in the state of Florida, I recall voters being absolutely saturated with negative advertising about Romney along with his competitors. Do you think that may be one of the reasons Romney is not doing as well there in the state of Florida, at least so far?
Yeah, he has some recovery work to do there. Romney, though, himself spent a lot of money on negative ads against his opponents in Florida because he could afford to do it, and his opponents, Santorum and Gingrich, really couldn't at the time. So, yeah, he has some work to do there. But I'll also bring up the immigration issue. And immigration, in probably the most important issue in Florida, most compared to any other state except maybe Texas and Arizona, huge issue there. And Romney, during the primary, definitely went to the right. Remember his comment about self-deportation?
Yeah.
These are the kinds of issues that are really really matter to Florida voters.
Well,
so he's going to have to go back there and talk to them.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to show you a national poll on immigration. This is Quinnipiac, and it finds that Mitt Romney is favored over President Obama, 43 to 39%. Why is that? And do you think immigration in the end will really be much of an issue come November?
I think it depends what the economy looks like. If the economy is still in bad shape, I think that's going to be voters' primary concern when they go to the polls. I think it's more of a tertiary issue in many states except Florida. Obviously, as I said earlier, it's a big issue there. The one thing that could change that, though, Greg, is if we have some kind of incident, perhaps something along the lines of the Elian Gonzalez incident several years ago, something like that that really brings the issue to the forefront of American politics. That could change that very quickly.
But real quick, why is Romney ahead nationally on immigration, ahead of President Obama? You would think it would be the opposite, wouldn't you? Hispanics have a tendency to vote Democrat.
I'm not sure it would necessarily be the opposite. I think the fact that the voters have heard Romney talk about immigration a little bit more than the president. The president obviously supported the DREAM Act that failed to make it through Congress. But other than that, the president has not really kind of initiated any comprehensive immigration reform package. And I think a lot of voters expected a little more of him for that in this first term.
And of course, my question sort of suggested that we're talking about only Hispanic voters, when in fact, that was a national poll by Quinnipiac of all voters, and it may reflect sort of just the opposite of Hispanic sentiment. So Shira Toeplitz, as always, great to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up this hour, the president